Segment 3, Gold and Black Live. Brian Neubert did a quick wardrobe change, so he's good to go. He's good to go. We love the Yankee category. There you are, quick change. Tom Dienhart joined me, and thanks obviously to Matt Painter and Eric Hunter Jr., our first two segments. Always interesting stuff coming from those guys. Want to thank our sponsors too, Triple X on the hill, but on the level of Purdue tradition since 1929, Hilton Garden Inn, and State Farm agent Trent Johnson. Guys, to kind of wrap up and put the finishing touches on this Friday afternoon, still a week to go, a week and a day to go to that season opener. And we want to hit a little bit of basketball too, because obviously that has started too with Brian's coverage. Tom, I'm going to start with you. This is one of those things that we're inching closer. We're hearing from coaches. There's optimism. Purdue's health seems to be good for the most part, with the exception of the Jackson Anthrop injury, I guess, at this point. But where are we right now, 8 days before that season opener in your view?
Yeah, I mean, talked to all the assistant coaches, talked to many players. We've also talked, of course, to Coach Jeff Brom. Over the last couple of weeks, his training camp has progressed and now finished. Like you said, Alan, time to jump into game week, buddy. I wasn't sure if we would ever get to this point.
Yeah.
Going back to mid-March, here we are. Everybody's fingers are crossed. Depends on who you ask if we'll make it through 9 games in a row, but I'm optimistic with the health and safety and testing protocols that are in place. But as you guys and viewers know, boy, there's been a lot of, I guess, pitfalls already in the SEC, Big 12, ACC, and, of course, the National Football League. But on the field, a lot of optimism for Purdue. We all have talked about the potential issues, the questions that hang over this program on both sides of the ball. Again, we've not laid our eyes on these football players since the last spring football practice in March. So we're all eager to get a look at these guys when they come out next, I guess, Saturday, October 24th, to play the Iowa Hawkeyes. And, guys, you know what? It's a huge ball game. You only have 9 of these this year, and this is a big ball game for the pecking order in the Big Ten West. And, guys, Brian's talked about it and written about it. All eyes will be on who takes that first snap for the Boilermakers, and maybe more importantly, guys, will we see 2 quarterbacks in game number 1 for Purdue?
Brian, you look at this from that perspective of again, maybe never thinking we were going to get to this point. Certainly we didn't think this way on August 11th when the Big Ten chose to cancel/postpone its schedule. But now you're here. You've written time and again about all bets may be off in terms of this may be a very level playing field. This is definitely going to be a different playing field and maybe something we can't predict from week to week.
Yeah, I mean, as I've said over and over again, I think the results this year are going to be more randomized than ever. There's going to be no discernible home field advantage, no discernible home field disadvantage probably, except for having to deal with the hassles of life on the road in COVID world. It's entirely plausible outcomes are going to be decided by COVID tests.
Yeah.
It's entirely plausible that some teams are going to play fewer games than other teams, as was the case in baseball and some other things. I don't know if the Big Ten is going to have a whole lot of latitude to reschedule games since they've got 9 going into 9 weeks here. I don't know if they can do what the NFL's done, where if a game gets pushed back from a Sunday, you can play it on a Tuesday with the 21-day protocols in place for positive tests or whatever. I have no idea how that's going to work, but it's entirely plausible teams might go into games with a position or 2 decimated by contact tracing, by people in quarantine. It's entirely reasonable to think that outcomes, not just on the game-to-game level, but potentially on the entire season level, are going to be determined by circumstance that is largely outside anyone's control. If you lose your quarterback, obviously that shapes how your season goes, most likely. And all of those things are going to be on the table this year. I think when you look at what happened in the SEC this weekend, where I think you've got at least 2 games off, Nick Saban's got COVID. He's going to be coaching from home. If he's coaching at all, I don't know how that's going to work, but all of this stuff still looms over everyone's head every day of every week of every month. And there are no guarantees, no matter how ironclad the Big Ten's protocols look. There are no guarantees the Big Ten's going to, get through this season without incident. I don't want to say get through this season, period, but you never know. I mean, every day is a new day in this world we're living in, and this is not a simple endeavor all of these conferences are trying to pull off here by playing a football season under these conditions.
You look, Brian, I'll come back to you because we had Matt Painter on in segment 2, and even Eric Hunter talked about that as well in terms of, men's basketball obviously had to move practice back, as it turned out, one day as it turned out, but it was another situational deal dealing with COVID and the need to pick up and move on.
Right, and that's part of it. I mean, there are situations that are going to come into play where there might be false positives, there might be false negatives too. There's so much room for chaos here. Where basketball, I guess the trap they fell into there was they had a couple of indications of positive tests. Purdue played it as safe as possible. They were erring on the side of caution. Not every coach is going to treat things that way, especially in certain parts of the country. And had those been positive tests and Purdue not taken that sort of approach, that could have, really led to some problems. So you're still in a world here where people are treating this differently. People are guided by their own sense of responsibility, guided by their own ethical compass, however you want to put it. And some people are going to be a little bit faster and looser with things than other people have. I've always thought the SEC obviously is one that was going to play this football season no matter what. And then you hear about, entire teams having had COVID. It's just, there's just so much room for interpretation in all of this on every level. And it's be ready for anything. That's probably the biggest takeaway for this season, is that anything can happen at any time. As I said, any day of any week of any month.
Tom, some news on obviously on the site this morning. Giovanni Howard and DJ Johnson, in terms of the cornerbacks, the pieces falling together. Again, you won't know until you see them tee it up a week and a day from now. But just another set of interesting circumstances that may allow this Purdue defense and Purdue football to come together. Certainly, that has to be the hope for that staff and being able to, Bob Diaco and company, be able to do the job it needs to do for Purdue to be as competitive as it needs to be.
Yeah, there's a lot of potential in the back end of this Purdue defense. It's, in a lot of ways, guys, been remade with the injection of some veteran newcomers, if you will, specifically at cornerback. You talked about that, Al, and Giovanni Howard, junior college transfer, and, of course, the Iowa transfer, DJ Johnson, still waiting to get his full eligibility cleared. Jeff Brom expects that to happen. Stay tuned. And at the safety spot, guys, don't forget about Tyler Coyle, who also sounds like it's going to play a little outside linebacker or the dog spot in a 3-4 defense. So, again, factor in Simeon Smiley's return, factor in Cam Allen and Brennan Thieneman, the rival of the redshirt freshman Marvin Grant. Guys, there's a lot of intriguing pieces in the back end of this defense. As far as the line goes, if you listen to the Jeff Brom show Wednesday night, he thinks they're too deep up front. Anytime you're good up front, you have a chance to have a good defense, guys. Now the only thing Purdue needs is that linebacking core to come together. But, Alan, I think this defense has a lot of nice pieces. How quickly do they adapt to Diaco? And, again, early success certainly will fuel the confidence of a defense with a lot of potential.
Yeah, Brian, you look at that, and there's never been so many moving parts. We've watched Jeff Brom assemble a pretty decent defense in 2017 with some transfers and that made a big difference in that. Again, another example, Brian, that a lot of moving pieces, and it's all going to be how well these pieces come together and whether they're all healthy, et cetera, on game day.
Yeah, I mean, I still don't know if you have the most physical defense. You don't have the most necessarily experienced defense in terms of the system they're in. But
yeah,
when you look across the board, they have a lot of guys who look like they can play. Now, I think the biggest thing for this defense this year is making sure all of your assets are in positions to be as productive as they can be. that means how does Derek Barnes take to playing linebacker when that's the position he moved out of a few years ago for a reason. Now, obviously, he's in the middle now. He was on the outside before, but I thought he had a pretty decent year as a pass rusher. Obviously, wasn't the most disciplined edge player all the time as a defensive end, but I think had he remained in that position, he could have built on some things this year. George Karlaftis in a 3-4, obviously you want him in as many positions as possible to make plays. I think, traditionally defensive ends, when you go into a 3-4, they wind up occupying blockers more than they end up beating them. That's kind of the job description. Now, I know Purdue's smart enough to understand that they don't want to completely neutralize George Karlaftis, so they're going to work around this stuff. But I think that's part of what's important this year in terms of making sure the assets you do have are in positions to be as productive as possible. Purdue did put together a very good defense in 2017, but that wasn't necessarily a complete defense. They were really good against the run. I think that was part emphasis, part what they had in terms of having a Jalen Robinson, having a Juwan Bentley, having a Danny Izuchukwu, guys who were physical players up front. And Nick Holt's system was very, very predicated on stopping the run. And I think emphasis on top of having some guys who were motivated and that jibed with their strengths as players, I think that made them very good against the run. I think, Purdue wasn't very good against the pass that year. They had a hard time getting off the field on third down. And that's part of the reason that Bob Diaco is here, is because Purdue hasn't been very good against the pass. Purdue's given up too many big plays. Purdue's not been very good on third and long. I think the back half of that defense really, really looms large this year in that sense. They've got to cut down on the big plays. They got to get off the field on 3rd and 8, and they've got to just be better, stopping the pass, because they've given up too many big plays and they've been stuck on the field too long when they shouldn't be on the field anymore. So that secondary and that pass rush, especially working in conjunction, are going to be absolutely critical, obviously, as they always are.
As they always are. And that's what's going to be an interesting storyline. We'll have much more with that next week. Also on Gold and Black Live, we'll have Mike Berghoff and Mike Babinski as our special guests, but we'll be heading, obviously, Purdue, Iowa. Game week coverage. Tom Dienhart here. You'll be drinking out of a fire hose, as will Brian, in terms of getting ready for that first game. Make sure you check the site for that as well, as we'll have our standard game week coverage as we lead into that Purdue, Iowa football game. All right, I want to thank our sponsors, of course, again, Triple X, and Hilton Garden Inn, State Farm agent Trent Johnson, the good folks at WLFI, Scott Sumner, Gordon Jackson, back in the studio that helped get this put together, the Zoom format working well for us, and we appreciate all of you out there that take a chance to watch and enjoy Gold and Black Live. So we'll see you next week. And that'll be October the 23rd, the day before the first Purdue football game, as we have our next edition of Golden Black Live. Again, final thanks to Matt Painter and Eric Hunter Jr. too for their appearances in segment 1 and segment 2. And have a great week, everybody. Thanks for watching, and we'll be back next week on Golden Black Live.